Te reo ererangi o te mānia. This episode was produced in Otatahi by Plains Media, with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Spin Me a Tale with Tessa Trolove. Let's step into a world of dragons and daring with Avis and the Promise of Dragons by Healther McQuillan and published by Ahoy, an imprint of the Cuba press in 2019. Close your eyes and let the magic carry you away. Avis glanced anxiously at the gaping hole in the plastic and hoped that Humbert kept up his humming and the lizards kept hiding. She hurried through the security doors, remembering to lock them behind her. Right now, the pressing need was Humbert. She could still hear his hum in her head when she reached Papa Lou's dairy. Outside the shop were two magazine displays. This week, they both had pictures of Aaron Miller on them. One had the headline, "Miller, Traitor or Treasure?" The other said, "Australia claims our Aaron." They're welcome to him, Avis thought. As she stepped through the door, the chime went off and Mr. Papaloo looked up from the pile of magazines he was sorting. She saw him flip the latest issue of Gossip and Guff over to hide the cover, but she'd already seen it. Aaron Miller on a beach with his girlfriend. "Talofa," Mr. Papaloo called and started walking towards the milk fridge. "I don't need milk today. I need chocolate," said Avis. Mr. Papaloo chuckled. "That sounds desperate." Avis realised that she had sounded desperate, very desperate, and so, in an attempt to appear a bit more relaxed, she slowed her pace, letting her arms swing a little. Mr. Papaloo was still chuckling. "A chocolate emergency, eh? Well, you've come to the right place. Lots of chocolate here." Avis walked over to the chocolate display. Mr. Papaloo was right. There was plenty of choice. Chocolate, licorice logs, chocolate marshmallow bars, peanut slabs, white chocolate, milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and boxes of filled chocolates. Avis ran her fingers over the bars, trying to decide which one Humbert would like best. Perhaps the caramel-filled block. Or maybe the peppermint one. Her eyes kept returning to a block up on the top shelf, a thin white package with large letters that said, "Dark Noir 95%, cocoa/cacao. She reached for it and felt her fingertips tingle. That would be Humbert's favourite, she was certain. She looked at the price, $5. $5 whole for one thin bar. She was sure Humbert would need more than that. Mr. Papaloo was bent down over the magazines. Mrs. Papaloo was nowhere in sight and there was no other customers in the shop. The hum in Avis's head revved up. Humbert wanted this chocolate. He needed this chocolate. Avis felt dizzy. Her heart was racing, but the decision was already made. She pushed the bar of dark noir up inside her t-shirt, let out a long breath, and waited. Nothing terrible happened. No alarms went off. Nobody shouted, "Thief!" The whining had turned to pleasant humming. Avis's heart settled and she looked back at the chocolate shelf. There was one more block of dark noir. She took it off the shelf. Behind it was a sticker that gave the reordering number. Avis carried the bar to the counter as casually as she could pretend and put down her $5 note. "Are you sure you want that one?" Mr. Papaloo asked. "Not many people like such a strong chocolate." He turned the packet over and read out loud, "To best experience 95% cacao, taste a small piece and let it melt in your mouth." "It's not for me," said Avis. "I'm getting it for someone who really appreciates chocolate." "If it's for Bruno, he usually gets these," said Mr. Papaloo, holding out a peanut slab. "It's not for Bruno," said Avis. Her feet were tapping anxiously on the ground and she really wanted to get back to Humbert. She felt his hum like bees buzzing in her ribcage, right next to the hidden chocolate. "If you're sure, just don't come back and complain if it wasn't sweet or that it gave you a headache." Mr. Papaloo took the money and put it in the till. Avis grabbed the chocolate bar and ran out of the shop, clasping both bars to her chest, the one she had paid for and the one she'd stolen under her t-shirt. She ran straight into Drake Snelling. "Hey, you owe me a peacock feather," he said. "I do not," said Avis, dodging to get past him. "You do, if you don't want me telling Papaloo what you've got under your t-shirt," he said, grinning. Avis stopped still. The breath trapped in her lungs seemed to be burning a hole and melting the chocolate bar. She'd never stolen anything before. She'd never do that. But she had done that. I followed you from the witch's house. You've got a key. All you have to do is let me in and I'll pull a feather off the peacock. Then I won't tell about your shoplifting. The peacock has gone, said Avis, her face flushing with frustration. She had to get back to Humbert. She had to get rid of Drake. So you were lying, Drake sneered and started to walk towards the shop door. He paused by the display stand with the trader headline. Maybe it runs in the family, he smirked. No, said Avis. I can get you a feather. I can get you lots. She started to run down the road towards Melinda's and was relieved to see that Drake was following her and not dobbing her into Mr. Papaloo. She unlocked the gate. Wait here, she said when he tried to push past her. How come you've got a key? Are you the witch's apprentice or something? Yes, hissed Avis as she closed the padlock tight to keep Drake out. She's teaching me her spells. Wait here and I'll get you the feathers. Once inside the gate, she could hear the urgent hum coming from the back garden and not just in her head. Avis shook her head to stop the sound penetrating her brain and quickly gathered up 3 of Percy's weather-beaten feathers. She ran back to the gate and pushed them through the gap. Cool, said Drake. Nice doing business with you, Mavis. We should do this again. It's Avis. Okay, car rental, don't go mental, said Drake, sauntering down the road, waving his peacock feathers. Get lost, Drake. Duckhead, yelled Avis after him. It was pathetic, she knew, but it felt good to have the last word. Avis breathed a sigh of relief that he was gone and rushed back to the tunnel house and the demanding whine of the Tiju choker. As she entered, Avis looked up at the tunnel house roof and was relieved to see that none of the lizards were examining the hole in their means of escape. Standing in the dirt patch in his enclosure, Humbert was only vaguely visible. He had camouflaged to a dusty grey, but his pink snout was raised in the air and his violet-tinged wings were quivering as he gulped air between each whine. Avis scrambled under the netting and held out one of the chocolate bars. Humbert's movements were so quick that Avis did not see his sharp claws grab the chocolate. She only caught a blur as the fine wings lifted both the lizard and the chocolate bar up into the fronds of the low palm tree. She watched the shreds of white cardboard wrapper drift, snowflake-like, to the ground as Humbert devoured the whole dark noir 95% cocoa/cacao bar. The effect of the cacao was instantaneous. Humbert dropped like a stone from the palm frond and landed heavily on the ground. Avis rushed to pick him up and saw with a shock that this would not be possible, for once again he was outgrowing his skin. It split and ripped along unseen seams and fell to the ground, crinkling like a chip wrapper. He was no longer the size of a kitten, but now the size of a large dog. His new, plump body gleamed like a polished red sports car. His claws glistened like chrome mags and his tail twitched to a rich maroon tip. He stretched out wings that were boned and tipped in the finest gold. Avis gasped at his beauty. Humbert's topaz yellow eyes rolled around and around as he admired himself from every angle. Then his nose twitched and he cast those greedy eyes back on Avis. She folded her arms across her chest, trying to hide the other chocolate bar. It's not for you, she said. There were 2 eggs. Where's your nest, mate? You need to share. Humbert's eyes twirled around the enclosure. A terrible thought came to Avis. What if Humbert were a cannibal? You didn't eat the other one, did you? You wouldn't. Humbert's eyes came to rest on a fern over in the corner in a damp space. Avis kneeled down and peered under the fern. There, in a little hollow of damp leaves, was an egg, a soft-shelled, grey-looking thing, half covered in dirt. You're keeping it cool, said Avis, surprised by her own understanding. So it won't hatch too soon. She looked back at Humbert and saw a greedy eye still on her. The black iris narrowed to a vertical slit. Or so you can get all the food for yourself. The lizard lifted his head and let out a snort through his nose. It was a laugh, and Avis laughed too. Okay, greedy guts. She leapt aside as the large lizard curled back his lips a little to show her how his teeth had grown. "You can have it," she said, backing up. "You don't need to be aggressive, and I'm sorry I laughed at you." Humbert stopped snarling and watched closely as Avis unwrapped the chocolate bar for him. A long crimson tongue twitched at the corners of his mouth. Avis broke off a piece and offered it in the palm of her hand. "Here, taste a bit and let it melt in your mouth," she said. Humbert stretched his neck forward and delicately took the offered piece with a long, dry tongue. He held it in his mouth and allowed it to melt there. His eyes rolled in ecstasy and closed. He swallowed deeply and sighed, making the gold on his wingtips shimmer. Avis saw a crumb of dark chocolate on her own finger. She lifted it to her mouth to lick it off. Humbert's eyes snapped open again. A deep growl rolled through his body and he pulled back into a threatening crouch. The front of his snout curled in a snarl and then a roar, revealing his twitching red tongue like a ribbon of blood between sharp white teeth. Avis felt his anger rush at her on a warm breath of air, and she panicked, throwing the remaining chocolate at him before scrambling out under the netting. She watched in horror as Humbert wolfed down the chocolate and expanded once more. When Humbert had finished growing and his crimson skin had split and fallen to the ground, Avis came to the terrifying realization that the creature standing before her, as tall as a horse and covered in an armor of overlapping copper scales, wasn't a lizard at all, but a myth come true. Humbert was a fully fledged dragon. His neck was strong and his heavy head crowned with horns. Bony ridges shielded his eyes and flaring nostrils dominated his long, pointed snout. The wings were like highly polished bronze, and when he stretched them, they filled the entire enclosure. A serpent-like tail writhed behind him. Humbert turned his head from side to side and admired his dragon body. Avis backed away. Humbert pushed his snout towards her, his teeth bared in a sneering snarl, but his horns became tangled in the fine netting. With a swing of his head, the whole wall of netting was pulled from the rafter. As Humbert took a step out of his enclosure, the geckos and skinks that had been hiding nearby scampered to the other end of the tunnel house. He swished his tail and the tip of it hit against the plastic walls. The sound reverberated like a drum and he spun around in fright, catching a wing on the ground in the process and tumbling over. He scrabbled to a sitting position, his head to one side and a look of surprise on his face. Avis suppressed a laugh. The throbbing in her finger reminded her that this dragon did not like being laughed at. Humbert's claws came caught in the netting and he tripped again as he tried to stand up. In panic, he rolled over and the net rolled with him. The more he struggled, the more entangled he became. The foliage all around was flattened, and when he stopped rolling, the whining started again. This was a different tone to the hungry hum, but no less compelling. This hum called to Avis to free him. It told her that he would die if she left him like this. He wheedled and begged and he whined. "No," she said, "you're a dragon. How do I know you won't eat me?" The whining stopped and the dragon struggled in angry frustration. The netting pulled tighter around his wings. Avis was glad for the silence. "I can't set you free," she said. "You're too big. You could be dangerous. Where would you go?" The dragon hummed again, and the hum painted a picture in Avis's mind of a lazy brown river meandering through a dense jungle. She thought of mossy caves and hanging vines. Then she saw the jungle from a bird's eye, or rather a dragon's eye view. It stretched like a great green blanket as far as the eye could see. Avis knew that Humbert had never been to the rainforests of South America or watched the news reports about how they were being destroyed by fires and machines, but she understood that this was where his inherited memory told him he should be. "There's nowhere like that here," she said. "There's probably not many places left like that anywhere on Earth." At last, the humming stopped and the dragon lay still. Avis's thoughts cleared and she was able to think through the problem that currently faced her. If she let him out of the netting, there was no way that the tunnel house would hold him. He could fly up to the hole in the roof and rip it open with his sharp claws. She would have to tie him down. It would take a strong chain. Humbert whimpered. A large tear welled up in his eye and rolled down his cheek. It hit the ground and soaked into the soil. His whimper accused her of having a cold heart. It accused her of not living up to her responsibilities as a pet sitter. "That's not fair," she said in her own defence. "I stole chocolate for you, but that's when you were small. You needed me to look after you then, but now you're bigger and it's different." His pitiful look told her that this wasn't true. He still needed looking after, and she was the one who needed to do it. Avis looked at the huge creature tangled awkwardly in the net. She tried to remember why she had thought him so beautiful only moments ago. All the shine was gone from him now, and he appeared scaly and awkward and needy. "I don't have a cold heart," said Avis, feeling it warm up even as she spoke. "But you're a big responsibility. I promised Melinda that I'd look after you until she gets back, and I will. I promise I'll do whatever you need." She hadn't meant to say that. Not after she had read in Melinda's notebooks about the legend of the Tiju Choker and how they had the power to bind humans to their will. She'd already felt some of that. She'd never have stolen the chocolate if Humbert hadn't gotten in her head somehow. Now she had made a promise to a dragon. Avis held her breath. Humbert stopped humming. He cocked his head as if questioning what he had just heard. The one eye that Avis could see through the netting fixed on her, and the pupil in the centre widened. Although he looked like he was smiling, another tear rolled down his cheek, slipping over his scales and falling to the ground. But this tear did not soak into the soil. As it fell, it had hardened and formed a gleaming diamond. Humbert's eyes fixed on Avis, waiting for her to pick up the dragon's tear. "I didn't know," she started to say and stopped. Avis considered the words she had spoken. She had promised to look after Humbert, to do whatever he needed. "What if I change my mind?" she asked. "What if I can't keep my promise?" "I'll remind you," he hummed, "and I promise you the same in return." Avis felt the shiver on her skin as she stepped closer to the dragon in the net and picked up his tear. It was warm to the touch and nestled in her hand, turning the softest of pinks like rose petal cream, and so the promise was sealed. Humbert's immediate need was to be freed from the netting. Avis looked around for something to cut through the strands. There was a knife by the fruit fly boxes for cutting up the food scraps, so with great care she knelt beside Humbert and began using it to cut through the thin nylon threads. Humbert lay motionless while she worked. When she was done, she bent over and gently stroked his scaly snout. "You can get up now," she said, "but be careful where you walk and keep your tail still." Avis stood up cautiously. He kept his tail in line behind him and folded his wings. With Avis walking beside his head, they made their way along the pathway, causing the skinks and geckos to scuttle back to the other end of the tunnel. Humbert eyed them hungrily. "No," commanded Avis. "I promised Melinda that I would care for them." Humbert averted his gaze, not because he wanted to, but because Avis needed it. Avis glanced up anxiously at the hole in the ceiling. She was thinking that if she took Humbert out of the tunnel house, as he needed her to do, then the lizards would once again want to bask in the sun and they would soon find their way out. It seemed impossible to keep them safe and keep her promise to Humbert. A plan had barely sorted itself all out in her mind when Humbert nodded his head and picked up a large piece of netting in his mouth. He followed her through the security door, squeezed through the shed, and was out into the open air for the first time in his life. He scampered on strong legs around the house, still carrying the netting in his jaws. Avis gave chase. "Don't you dare escape!" she called out, and knew with certainty that he could not disobey her. When Humbert got to the large front lawn, he ran faster and took off into the air, wobbling until he found his balance, and banking on one wing to turn and fly back over the tunnel house. He dropped the netting and it floated down, completely covering the hole in the roof. Avis clapped her hands as he flew back and landed on the grass beside her with a thump and a skid, his egg yolk eyes rolling with pride. "Well done, Humbert," she said with a grateful grin. But her love and pride quickly turned to disgust as he rose again and, with a flick of his long red tongue, dislodged a blackbird from where it was crouching in a fluff of frightened feathers on a branch. The blackbird disappeared into the dragon's mouth, making a crackling crunch as huge teeth splintered its bones. Humbert hummed happily and yawned. He gazed around and his eyes fell upon a shady nook beneath a huge rhododendron tree. The ground was littered with brown, fallen flowers. Humbert lay down on them and his scaly skin began to take on their mottled colours, until he looked as if he was covered all over in flowery wallpaper. His hum slowed to a droning buzz. "I'm sleepy," it seemed to say, "but I'll be awake and hungry again, very soon. Make sure you are here when I need you." Avis, clutching the dragon's tear in her hand, tiptoed away and let herself out of the gate, which she padlocked very carefully behind her. She stood on the path outside, breathing heavily, before deciding to go home and sit on the swing. She needed to figure out how she was going to meet the needs of a hungry and demanding dragon. That's all for today's adventure on Spin Me a Tale. Don't miss the next chapter coming your way next Saturday at 9:30 a.m. on Plains Media, broadcasting on 96.9 FM. Stay curious and keep the magic alive.